So, Ruchi, you're a minor in philosophy. Major in philosophy. Excellent. Then we have David, and we have Cheryl, and we have Tom, who have been to seminary. Anybody? So, and Matthew, of course. I don't know what your major was, but you're definitely a philosopher, a thinker. So, what I want to do, I want to continue fleshing out the. I'm glad that you guys are. I'm glad that we have your help here, you philosophers and your seminary students. To help the rest of us and to help the teacher also, how would you say, get it right. Help him to get it right. Let's see, Tom, you want to hand these out again? So our goal is continuing to bring into view the notion of person. The notion of person, I would call it the biblical notion of person, of the individual, that is coming to expression in the Christological definitions of faith, in the creed, in the controversies with regard to the essence of Christ, or essences, natures, relative to his humanity, his divinity, and the controversies over how to understand his person, his personhood, his personality, relative to his human nature and his divine nature. The reason that this is such a hot and difficult issue, and took the church, well, how would you say? Depends on your point of view, I guess. I feel that the church came to a solution in the 4th century with St. Gregory of Nazianzus. But the church herself did not really catch up with St. Gregory until perhaps maybe the 5th, 6th century, with the 5th Ecumenical Council and the 6th Ecumenical Council, where we talk about how to understand Christ's, the person of Christ relative to his divinity and his humanity. And then at the 6th Ecumenical Council, when the church really finally gets it on the head and gets to the nub of the issue, when we start talking about the natures of Christ, it's now been established that he has a human nature and a divine nature in one person. But now the issue really comes to the fore, which was already expressed in the 4th century with Apollinaris, and the refutation of Apollinaris by St. Gregory of Nazianzus and others. And that's the issue of the mind. Because there seems to be, and it seems quite clear, that does anybody not have a copy? That in antiquity, in Hellenistic philosophy in particular, it would seem that the center of the individual is the mind. So if Christ has a human mind, is he therefore a human person? And if he's a human person, that means that, and if he is God the Word, well, he's a divine person, but if he assumes a human nature, including a human mind, does that mean that he assumes a human mind? Does that mean that he assumes a human person? So are there actually two people in there behind the shell of Christ? That's the issue. Now, however, if the mind is this, the issue, that the understanding of the mind as apparently the center as the center of the individual, That in itself is it's a multifaceted issue. Because you remember that in a Hellenistic philosophy there was no developed notion of the person, of each one of you, of the particular. Can you tell me why? Who wants to guess? Venture a guess. Matthew?
Well, in Hellenistic philosophy, all of us,
okay, the many,
okay.
Yeah,
are simply facets or expressions of a single substance, of the one.
All right. We're all instantiations of the one essence. The many are the one, distributed out into the material world, the world of becoming. So even to say that, so in other words, your mind, your true self, is who? What? It's God. It's the one, yes. And I think it comes to expression most clearly in the Far East. And the Far Eastern notion is the notion of the Far West. There was exchange between the two. There was the trade routes. There was interchange between the two. But in the Upanishads, again and again, you come up with a question. The student asks the teacher, and says, "Teacher, what is Brahman? What is God?" And the answer is, "That art thou." I think you could say, and I don't know that this is universally accepted, but I accept it, that it was with Socrates that philosophy, which comes out of the womb of mythology, is in the form of the question of the one and the many, or it comes out of mythology, the womb of mythology, as cosmogony. What is it? How did the world come to be? Or no, not how the world came to be, because remember, the world is always was. There's no doctrine of creation in antiquity. No doctrine of creation. They're just the world is the creation, or the world, the cosmos is just going round and round in these kalpas, these cycles, endless cycles. So it comes out of the womb of mythology in the form of what is it that makes the world to be what it is. The goal being to come to know the world, so that one can master it. So that with the mind one can come to know the world as it exactly is. So when the church comes out of Israel, if you will, comes away from the mountain, where the Lord has ascended, and gives them the commission, "Go ye into all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, teaching them all the things that I have commanded you." They're coming into a world that thinks completely different from the biblical world. A world that understands the world, we call it the creation. Hellenistic philosophy, I don't see them calling it the creation. They call it the cosmos. They call it the world, but I don't see them calling it the creation. So they see the world completely differently. They see each one of you completely differently. In terms of the analogy that I find most useful, as each one of you being so many ice cubes that are frozen into yourselves, but when you die, you just dissolve back into the water that you are. So that you, as you, are of eternal value only because you are the one. You are God. You, as you, are not of eternal value because you, as you, don't exist. You're an illusion. So the goal of philosophy, at least from the time of Socrates, as I read it, that's when philosophy changes from cosmogony into what I would say psychology, a study of the soul. And the disciplines of philosophy now become, with the help of geometry And what was the other one? I can never remember the other one. What's that? Actually, it wasn't music theory. It was something. It was another astronomy. It was astronomy. Through geometry, the study of geometry and astronomy, learning to discard or to get beneath, all of the layers that one has accrued as one has fallen away from the one, to get rid of all of those material layers of becoming, of changing, to find the mind, the self, the truth, your true self that you are. And there you are. And once you find yourself, now you know who you are, you know what you are. You are that. Brahman and you are the same thing. So that there is no, so that even the many, all the particularity of the world is an illusion. It's not real. The world of becoming is not real. How can it be? Anything that changes, that means that it became something that it wasn't. So that means that it isn't. See, so becoming cannot be a real thing. It's an illusion. So all of this to say, and Ruthie, David, Cheryl, Tom, if you want to insert anything, Matthew, if you want to insert anything, please feel free to do so. But I'm just giving a kind of a flyover, just a very rough sketch of the world in which the Christian church entered when she followed the commission, came out into the world to go into all the nations, to give you a sense of how different the biblical faith is. Because what I'm describing, how does it feel to you? Does it feel foreign to you, or does it feel familiar to you? Cheryl?
I go back to the image you have of the snake,
the serpent,
eating its tail, the serpent, and then all of a sudden humanity, the first man, is standing up straight and is able, to begin to conceptualize a salvific future.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, isn't it? Just what is it that drove the development of human thought? So that comes out of the myth into philosophy, into science. What's driving that? And it depends on what school you belong to as to how you interpret it. It's a fascinating question. But now, if we could, I stumbled upon this. Last week I was reading from 1 Corinthians, and if I might, if you have a Bible, okay, you don't have Bibles. Let's start with chapter 2 of 1 Corinthians, chapter 2. He says, starting with verse 6, we speak wisdom among those who are perfect. And I believe that would be the baptized. You have been baptized. We speak wisdom. But wisdom that is not of this age, nor is it of the rulers of this age who are passing away. You've heard me summarize this by appealing to the words of the Venerable Monty Python. Now for something completely different. Guess what? That's biblical. We speak wisdom among those who have been baptized, among the perfected. But wisdom that is not of this age, nor is it of the rulers of this age that is passing away. We speak the wisdom of God, which is in a mystery that is hidden. In a mystery that is hidden. Which God, and the word is translated as foreordained, but that gets you into Calvinistic predestination, and that's not actually what the word means. Ruthie, you know some Greek. Pro-orizo. If that word sounds familiar with you, built off of orizo, horizon. We speak the wisdom of God in the mystery that is hidden, which God laid out He marked it out. In other words, the horizon. He marked out the horizon of this mystery before the ages. Before the ages, for our glory. Now catch it, catch it. In verse 6, he says, we speak wisdom among the perfect, the baptized. But the wisdom that is not of this age. It's not of this age. Why? Because, go to verse 7, we speak this wisdom of God that is in the mystery that is hidden, which God laid out before the ages. So the wisdom that we're speaking is a wisdom that was established before this world even came to be. Now again, that would make no sense to a Hellenistic mind, would it? Because this world always has been. Yes, Matthew?
So I was just sort of thinking about how if mythology gave birth to philosophy, and philosophy gave birth to science, the natural sciences, would the cosmological insight of modern astronomy, that the universe had a definite beginning, that is to say the Big Bang Theory,
Right.
be something of a vindication of a theological viewpoint? Or is it simply another turn in the... I mean, are we really... Is science actually sort of going back to mythology with things like string theory and...
That's a good question, Matthew.
Okay.
That's a good question. That's an interesting question. And if it is going back to mythology, Matthew, what have we got? We have the serpent swallowing his tail. We have the great round circling by. I don't know. I think that's a great question. Yes, Dan?
I would say that they explicitly are, because there's a number of areas in like cosmology where some of the like leading physicists and things like that admit that the percentage that they are off by is so far that they essentially have no idea what they're doing. And then you have other scientists like, or sort of pop scientists like Neil deGrasse Tyson and people like that will say, like, we don't do philosophy anymore. You know, it's all just, it's all starting with like equations in the head or whatever, and ideas, and then working out from that.
I think that's interesting.
I think they know where the evidence leads and they won't follow it.
I think that's interesting. I have my own take on that. I think it's just going to go round and round and round, round and round and round. And the round doesn't stop until you get inside the tomb. That's when the round stops. Will they go inside the tomb? No, they'll stay round, 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 round. Now, let me take you to chapter 1 of 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians begins with St. Paul chastising the Corinthians because I hear that one of you is saying, some of you are saying I am of Paul, some of you are saying I am of Apollo, I am of Cephas, I am of Christ. And then he goes on and he concludes this particular chastisement by quoting from Isaiah, where he says, where it says in Isaiah, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise and the understanding of the intellectual elite. I don't know. I'll set it naught. Now, when you go back to Isaiah and look at the context of that quote, it all starts to come together what he's really saying. Because in the section that he's drawing from in Isaiah, or the Lord is complaining to Isaiah about all of these false prophets. And they're all giving their own take on the threat of Assyria. And so the Lord says to Isaiah, I will destroy their wisdom, and their understanding I will set at naught. What I take from that is that what St. Paul is wanting to say is that what I taught you is not from men, going back to Galatians. This is from God. And what I taught you was not an interpretation. It was not a take. It was not a theory. It was not an idea. It was not a school of thought. And that is borne out even more in what follows. Verse 20, it reads, so where is the wife? Sophos. The word is sophos. I wonder if he may be talking about the Gnostics, or he may be talking about the philosophers. Where is the scribe? Where is the disputant, the arguer of this age? Has not God rendered the wisdom of this world foolish? For since, this is a beautiful verse to me, in the wisdom of God, the world did not come to know God, does not know God through the wisdom of God. You catch it. The world does not seek the wisdom of God. It seeks its own wisdom. And so in the wisdom of God, God has made it so that you cannot find God in your own wisdom, through the wisdom of men. You cannot. And he goes on. So God was well pleased that through the foolishness of the proclamation, those who were to save those who are being saved. For the Jews seek after a sign, the Greeks seek after wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified. To the Jews, a scandal. To the Greeks, foolishness. Now, a proclamation. You see how he is setting off the proclamation of the church from the theories of the philosophers or the scribes or the, what were they called, the arguers, the cynics. Is that what they were, the cynics? Who was that school that was always questioning everything?
The sophists?
So was it the sophists? The proclamation is not the word which we translate into English as the kerygma. You know, you might hear a preacher getting fancy every now and then talking about the kerygma. Well, the kerygma is the proclamation, and the proclamation is not the presentation of what Socrates thinks, or verses, let's say Aristotle, or some Far Eastern guru. Rather, the proclamation is the announcement of something that actually happened. It actually happened. And what actually happened? This is not a school of thought. You don't have to believe it if you don't want to, but your disbelieving it doesn't make it not happen. It happened. We're telling you it happened. And what happened was, Christ was crucified. Christ was crucified. Which to the Greeks is foolishness, and to the Jews it's a scandal. But you catch it. Our wisdom, the wisdom that went back to chapter 2, that is not of this age, this wisdom that we preach, that we're proclaiming to you, you see, it's not a theory, it's not a scientific hypothesis. It's an actual event. This is the wisdom that we teach you. Do you catch the difference? The one is theoretical, it's cognitive, it's intellective. The other is concrete. It's an actual event. This is the wisdom that we teach you. The wisdom of Christ crucified. Then he goes on, this lends force into what he's saying in chapter 2, verse 6. He says, after having said that to the Corinthians, that what we're preaching is, to the Greeks, it's foolishness. And to the Jews, it's a scandal. He goes on now and he says, so basically what he's saying is that what we're preaching you is foolishness. What we're preaching to you is offensive. But then he goes on into verse 6, he says, and then he turns it around. Chapter 2, verse 6. We do speak wisdom, he says. We do speak wisdom. We do talk about wisdom to those who are baptized. But it is a wisdom that is not of this age. Nor is it of the rulers of this age that are passing away. The wisdom that we speak is in a mystery that's hidden. which God laid out before the ages. And what is that mystery? Well, he just told us in chapter 1. It is Christ crucified. That's the wisdom that we teach. It's like the event, the mystery of Christ crucified is like an event that, obviously Christ crucified us. Christ died. He's dead. But it's all the more powerful if it's God who was dead. Good Lord, how is it that God is dead? If this is God who is dead, then that means that everything of this age is dead. It is no more. And it's just kind of whispering away. But the wisdom that is forever is actually on the other side of the grave of Christ. And so to get into this wisdom that is on the other side, that was actually laid out before this age even began, in order to get to that side, one must be baptized into Christ. Not just believe in him, not just believe in him. This is not an intellective thing. One must actually be baptized into Christ and into his death and come out into the other side. We've been talking about this in the catechumenate classes, how the exodus of Israel comes to an end at the tomb of Christ, and there it disappears from view. But the path of the exodus does not end. It goes into the tomb, it disappears from sight, but of course, who is it that's being buried in the tomb? It's the wisdom of God. The wisdom that is not of this age, because this wisdom is not a man. This wisdom is God. He goes into the tomb, disappears from view. So the only way that one can acquire this wisdom of God is for oneself to get into the tomb, which we do through baptism. And in the tomb, of course, the path of wisdom does not stop. It continues. This is the whole point that we're trying to make with the catechumens. Because we want to make sure they know what they're getting into when they become Orthodox. You're not just coming into another circle of thought, another school of thought. You're not exchanging one set of ideas for another, one set of practices for another. All of that is being put to death. You're coming into something completely different because what you're coming into is on the other side of the tomb. It's in a mystery that's hidden. This path of Christ, the wisdom of God, from the tomb, of course, where does it go? Well, you can trace him. You can trace the route of this path. First, we see him in the garden. Well, which garden? Understand, we're on the other side of the tomb now. So clearly, this is no longer just the garden on Golgotha. Clearly, this is the Garden of Eden. And Mary Magdalene is the Eve who fell, who has found who's found the new Adam. And from there, the path goes into Galilee. He goes before you into Galilee. Well, when he came out of the Jordan, when he was baptized, he went where? Into Galilee. I think it's pretty clear that Galilee here is our everyday life. He's going before you into your everyday life. The path of wisdom is in your everyday life, but it's hidden. And you're not going to see this path, nor are you going to find this path by trying to look for it in the schools of the philosophers. In the intellectual elite. It's like St. Gregory of Nazianzus, what he says in the 4th century. He says, whenever you say something to me about God, all you're telling me is what you think of God. You're not telling me about God at all. Because God cannot be known according to the wisdom of this age. We just read it in St. Paul. He cannot be known according to the wisdom of this age. All that has to be put to death. So you'll find the Christ in your everyday life as you put to death all of your understandings of things, the way that you look at the world, the way that you look at yourself, all of that has to be put to death. we need to find the Christ who is in us in the mystery of his incarnation. So we look for Christ within our everyday life. It becomes our exodus. It becomes like the Israelites going through the wilderness. Our everyday life is now our wilderness. Going through the wilderness or through our everyday life, and then the word is the Lord go from there. He goes up the mountain of his ascension, and from the mountain he goes into the kingdom of heaven. So this is the wisdom that we who have been baptized into Christ's death are now called to follow. And I fear that too many of us, when we're baptized, instead of going into the wilderness, or we might go into the wilderness for a short while, then the going gets tough, temptations come, afflictions, trials come, and we go back to Egypt. We don't continue with Christ through the desert to get into the promised land, which is the land of the resurrection. So this is, what am I trying to say with this? This understanding of Christ that comes to us from the Bible, and which the Holy Fathers were seeking to articulate in a philosophical way, so that they could proclaim the mystery of Christ to the philosophers even, to these Gentiles who thought and understood things in a completely different way. This mystery of Christ is something completely different. Something completely different. And 1 second, Matthew. And what is at the heart of this something completely different, this wisdom that is not of this age, is the understanding of who you are, where you came from, what the meaning is of you, and where you're going. This is coming to us from the Bible. This is a biblical understanding of the person. So Matthew will ask your question, and then if we have time, I'd like real quickly to show you what the biblical word for the hypostasis is. You know, the technical term for person. Matthew?
Well, so, again, thinking back about mythology and philosophy here, I mean, if you look at like the Gilgamesh or the Mabinogion or the Ramayana or whatever mythological corpus you have, there is this idea that the hero has to journey into the underworld and come out the other side.
Yes.
At the same time, though, it seems like mythology gets lost somewhere.
Hang on. Let's not say mythology gets lost. Let's say philosophy gets lost.
But I mean, in philosophy also you have the man, Socrates, who dies, but in his death is vindicated. At least the way of life that he, or at least this is Plato talking, right?
Yes.
The way of life that he was indicating through his trial and through his death is vindicated. So, I mean, it seems to me like they're trying to track two separate paths for a while, and then somewhere something goes wrong. Yes,
I think I know what you're saying.
Okay.
And of course, there's room for debate here, but this is my take on it. Mythology, as I have said, mythology, I believe, is true. It does not err until you try to contrive a myth. Now you're subject to error. Because I see the myth as the language of the soul, the immediate language of the soul. And the images of the myth are the words of the soul crying out. Philosophy comes along and tries to understand the myth. It tries to interpret it according to its own intellectual, its own wisdom. But if this is the language of the soul, the wisdom that is going to understand it and address it is not the wisdom of man. It's the wisdom that is not of this age. It's the wisdom of God. So it's theology. It's Orthodox theology that is faithful to the myth and address. And if you will, you can say that the myth is the hemorrhaging woman, and the Orthodox faith is the bridegroom who staunches the hemorrhaging. None of the philosophers could staunch it. Just thought you'd read. There's a mystery here. There's a mystery that the soul is crying out. Right, Lord, I call to thee from the depths. From out of the depths I cry unto thee. It's the language of the heart, which is the biblical word for the hypostasis. It's the biblical word for the person. So now, real quickly, okay, we have 30 seconds. Do you remember what the word hypostasis means in the Greek? Hypostasis, standing underneath. Now, earlier, the term hypostasis was equivalent or synonymous with the essence, ousia. The main difference was that the hypostasis referred to something that was actually existing. Essence could be more, Plato's idea, an abstraction. Origen, for example, he says, our primary substance is translated. Our primary substance, the word he uses is hypostasis. Our primary hypostasis is our having been made in the image of God. In other words, our primary substance, our primary essence, is our having been made in communion. We exist in communion with God. But with the Cappadocians in the 4th century, the term hypostasis is, its original tendency towards that which actually exists. That's what they lay hold of. That's what the Cappadocians lay hold of. And they craft it into a word that now refers to the particular. So there's a hypostasis of Christ. There's only one hypostasis. We read the definition of Chalcedon last week. But remember, we could not find a human hypostasis in this definition. We found a complete human nature, but we did not find a human hypostasis. That's because there is no human hypostasis in Christ. Because the person, the one who became incarnate, was God the Word. So now the hypostasis of Christ is the person of God the Word. But notice, look at this. The hypostasis is that which stands underneath everything. The human nature, the divine nature. The hypostasis stands underneath. So in a sense, the hypostasis, flip it, transcends the nature. Now, in the Bible, the word for heart. You go to the Greek Septuagint, Jeremiah 17:9. What does it say? It's in the Greek. It's not in your RSV, but it should be in your Orthodox Study Bible. Jeremiah 17:9. The heart is deep beyond all things, and it is the man. And it goes on to say something how the Lord knows the heart. The Lord alone knows the heart. Can you see how the word heart and hypostasis refer to the same mystery? That which stands underneath, the heart which is deep beyond all things. So it means that the heart contains the nature. Everything that the nature contains. Body, soul, and mind. So the heart is the self, if you will. It is the man. So that the heart, as that which is deep beyond all things, also therefore is like the hypostasis of Christ. It's open. It's open. It's not closed. So you are, in yourself, you're an opening. And you open out onto the deep, beyond all things. You open out onto the God who is the creator of all. As Origen says, our primary hypostasis, our primary substance is our having been made in the image and likeness of God. So that our heart, in the deep beyond all things, opens out onto Christ, who is himself the image of God. Colossians 1:15, Christ, the icon of the image of the invisible God. So that you are of eternal value in and of yourself, so much so that God knew you before you even came into existence. Psalm 139. That's not even a New Testament concept. That's an Old Testament concept. Psalm 139 is one place. The psalmist, he's reflecting on it. He can't wrap his mind around it. Even before I was being formed in my mother's secret parts, even my secret, You knew me. And even before I had come into existence, all the days of my life were written in your book. You knew me. So when Christ dies, what he's doing is he's going into the realm of death, which is the realm where each one of us has become completely closed off to ourselves and to each other. So we live in this absolute aloneness. This is hell, is it not? Absolute aloneness, absolute isolation, being forsaken by God. This is what it is to be in hell. Christ goes into that, and this is the mystery, the incomprehensible mystery of his words on the cross. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? I think that's the moment he died. But he's God. And in his divinity, he is not separated from God. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? And he has not even been disobedient. He has been obedient completely unto death. As I said last week, obedience and death don't go together. Righteousness goes with, or disobedience goes with death. Righteousness goes with life. So catch the mystery. He who was obedient to the Father, even to the point of death on the cross, he who in his own soul would never forsook his Father, never, and was always the beloved of his Father. This is the one who voluntarily enters into our forsakenness, and so that in our aloneness, in our hellish isolation, Christ has entered. Honestly, we have to cut this off now. But you think about this. If you in fact don't exist except as the one, you yourself have no reality except as the one, how are you going to account? Maybe I don't know. How are you going to account for that anguish in your soul? How are you going to account for that existential angst that you feel? Where's the hope? I guess the hope is that you're just going to dissolve, and along with it the angst. But honestly, who really wants that? Maybe I'm too Christianized. I don't want that. To me, that's the dissolution of love. I want love. I want to love. I want to be loved. That's what gives me joy. And if I'm feeling all alone, if I'm feeling forsaken, if I feel that I have betrayed someone, and I am the cause of this separation, that's hell. It's hell. But here's the proclamation of the gospel. You who are of eternal value are of such value that God, the Word himself, has entered into your tomb, the tomb of your heart, to cleanse you, to heal you, to gather you up, put you back together, and to raise you up from death to life, and back into the communion that you were made for, into the communion with the Holy Trinity. Okay, well, we got to cut this off. But perhaps this is enough for you to take it from here, and you start cogitating this. You start pondering this, and see what it leads to, what the hope that it leads to, and the joy that it can lead to, the good news that it leads to. All right, you got to get upstairs.